All right, everybody, we're going to begin by our ECA review by going over vocabulary. I'm going to go through things relatively quickly. You can stop, pause, rewind as necessary to get things down. So the vocabulary I'll be going over will be essential vocabulary that you'll need both for the vocabulary post test as well as for the ECA. So the first vocabulary is investigation. That's experimentation that scientists participate in to test predictions and hypotheses. Prediction is a statement. We also use the term hypotheses, but prediction is a statement regarding the outcome of an experiment based on previous information or educated guesswork. Observation, the information collected regarding experimentation that involves your senses. This generally involves seeing, hearing, touching, and collecting data. Inference, a conclusion based on observations or what is already known. Evidence, observations or data to support a statement, hypothesis, or point of view. We use evidence all the time in our RAT-C. Opinion, a personal belief not based on evidence or data. Control, part of an experiment that is not changed and remains the same in order to determine the experimental effects. Data, information gathered from an experiment or an investigation. Renewable resource materials such as water, plants, or animals that are naturally replenished by a natural process, generally relatively quickly. Variable, the factor which is changed in an experiment either by the scientist or as a result of the experiment. Lithosphere, the rigid upper portion of the earth that is broken into plates. It includes the crust and the uppermost portion of the mantle. Non-renewable resources, materials such as petroleum, coal, natural gas, and many minerals that cannot easily or quickly be replaced by natural systems. Mantle, the layer of the earth between the outer crust and the inner core. Rock, a naturally occurring solid substance composed of one or more minerals. Model, any representation of a system or its components to help one study and understand how it works. Geological time, periods of thousands, millions, and billions of years referred to by geologists, paleontologists, and other scientists who study the Earth's history. Plate tectonics, the theory that the rigid outer portion of the Earth is broken into large separate sections, which moves at a specific speed in specific directions. Cell, the smallest unit of life. Tissue, a group of similar cells that perform a specific function. Weathering, the breakup of rocks caused by mechanical or chemical processes. Organelles, membrane-bound cell structures that perform a specific function. Multicellular, made up of more than one cell. Organ, a collection of tissues which performs a particular function or set of functions. Function, a specific job of an organelle, cell, tissue, or organ. Nucleus, membrane-bound organelle that is the control center of eukaryotic cells that contains DNA. Remember, prokaryotic cells, the early or beginning cells, do not contain nucleus. Mass, the amount of matter in an object. Speed, the rate at which an object moves. Energy, the ability to cause objects to change, move, or work. Distance, the length measured between 2 points. Force, a push or a pull. All right, and now we are going to go to the parts of the study guide in which we have the concepts that we need to know. Answering ECA questions. Now, ECA meaning end of course assessment questions. There's going to be a unique way that these are written, and I want to go over it. It's not hard, but you do need to think about it. You will have occasionally where it will say, explain why you chose your answer and why you did not choose one other answer. Okay? So why you chose one answer and why you did not choose one other answer. And so in this example, it says, why is the sky, what color is the sky when the sun is shining? A, black, blue, B, black, C, green, D, none of the above. Well, we know the answer is blue, but then you must choose why why you chose your answer and why you did not choose one of the other answers. So this would be how you would answer this. And we are this year using CER. So any of the questions that have explain why you chose one or why you did not choose another, or explain with the trade-off, make sure that you use CER. So we know the answer is blue, but here is how we would go about answering that question fully. So it says, when the sun is shining, the sky is blue. I know this because when I look outside and the sun is shining and there are no clouds, the sky is blue. I didn't choose black because the sky is only black at night when the sun isn't shining. Based on the evidence of my observations, I know that the sky is blue and not black or green when the sun is shining. So let's take a look at what we've done here. First, we've made our claim. So our claim is, when the sun is shining, the sky is blue. So that's our claim. Now, what's our evidence for that claim? So we'll pick a different color here. Our evidence is, I know because when I look outside and the sun is shining and there are no clouds, the sky is blue. Now, we also, in addition, cited where we got that evidence. We got it when we look outside. So do make sure that you cite where you get your evidence. And in this case, it's actually from yourself. And then you need to explain why you didn't choose another. And so that would be here. I didn't choose black because the sky is only black at night when the sun isn't shining. And again, we're assuming that that's because you've been looking outside. So there's a second piece of evidence cited when you look outside. Then it says, based on the evidence of my observations. So we've made our claim. We've cited our two pieces of evidence, our evidence of what it is and what it isn't. And then we have added our reasoning. So based on this evidence of our observations, we know that the sky is blue and not black or green when the sun is shining. And that would be our reasoning. Now, using 4, 3, 2, 1, that would be probably a 3. Doesn't really go above and beyond, but remember, on the CERs for the ECA, if you get a 3, that means you get full credit. If you get a 4, if you go above and beyond, then you actually get a half a point extra credit. So a 3 is full credit for the ECA. Now, you might ask, well, how would I get that? Well, you would go in and you would give a little bit more information. What about a green sky? Actually, there are sometimes green skies. Green skies come before a storm. So you might add something else. You might bring in some other observation or some information from a chart. And then that would get you a 4 for a CER. And I don't believe the ECA will have any questions where it'll say why you chose 2 answers. So that would be how you would answer a question like that. All right, then next, scientific observations. What makes a good observation? Well, it's based on facts using your senses. And then you need to be able to know the difference between physical and chemical properties. So a physical property is a property that can be counted or observed using your senses, and it does not involve, they do not involve chemical reactions. So color, state of matter, size, hardness, luster, flexibility. Think of all those properties that we studied when we looked at rocks. Those would all be physical properties except for one, if you remember back, chemical properties. And those are properties that are a result of a chemical reaction. So during the chemical reaction, there could be a change in color, a formation of a new chemical, heat could be produced, cooling, bubbling, and one of the examples, hopefully, that you remember from that is when we put hydrochloric acid on minerals and occasionally it would react and cause bubbling. All right, then experimental design. What makes a good design? You will have a question where you will have to set up a lab, just as we have had to do before. So what makes a good lab? Now, this question will not be just list the parts of a lab. You'll list them and then you'll explain them. So for instance, the first thing you always list is the purpose of the lab. So what's the purpose? Back to our minerals. When we were doing rocks and minerals, we did a lab where what is the mystery mineral? Is it calcite or quartz? So that would be the purpose. We usually went to the challenge question. You'll have to look at the question on the ECA to determine what is the purpose of this lab. Then the prediction. I predict that this mineral will be calcite, or I predict it will be quartz, or I predict that trees will grow, the plants will grow better in the school garden if they're watered better, a prediction or hypothesis. Then any safety. If we're going to be using chemicals, we need to wear our safety goggles. How do we get rid of, how do we make sure that we're safe? Then materials, you'll have to list the materials that you would use. I promise you that the lab will not be too complicated in such a way that you would not know the names of the materials, but be thinking scientifically. Procedure, remember step by step. When we've done labs, we've talked about we're doing it for a 4th or a 5th grader, not for a 7th or an 8th grader. So make sure that the procedures are such that people can understand them. Then a data collection device. So in the case of when we were doing the mystery minerals, we needed to put the different tests that we were going to be doing in the procedures, and then the data that we would collect on those tests. Then finally, a conclusion. That's going to be your analysis question. So just a reminder, we're going to do some kind of an analysis question here. So whatever, you do not have to answer the analysis question for this lab that you're setting up, but you do need to have an analysis question. Again, this will be one of those situations where you'll get full points. You'll get a 3 out of 3, 4, 2, 1 if you have these things. If you have a good analysis question, if your procedure is well written, then you could get a 4. Okay, plants versus animal cells. Just talked about these recently. Plant cells, remember, have a cell wall, they have chloroplasts, and they have a large central vacuole. Animal cells tend to be more variety in size. They tend to be, plant cells typically are more square, rectangular. Animal cells can vary in their shape. They do have many smaller vacuoles. Cell biology and disease, what we are just finishing up now. How do we prevent disease? Well, there's a number of different ways. Washing our hands, making sure we cover our mouth when we sneeze, not coming to school when we're sick, those kinds of things. How are infectious disease spread? Well, I would encourage you to go back and look at your words. Carrier, remembering what is a carrier. A carrier is someone who has the disease but doesn't show symptoms, so they can be rather dangerous. There are also vectors. Those are organisms that don't actually have the disease, not human, and they can take the disease from one organism to another. In the case of the bubonic plague, if you remember, the vector was the flea. The flea bit the rat that had the disease and then bit the person, and the saliva gave the person the disease. Also, remember that infectious diseases are carried by organisms we call microbes. Okay, so we have microbes, and for our purposes, microbes were bacteria, viruses, and protists. Okay, bacteria, viruses, and protists. So that is an infectious disease. Now, there are other types of diseases, cancer, heart disease, but those are generally caused more by genetics or environmental situations, not infectious. So be sure you're aware of this different term and what infectious, in fact, means. Okay, non-renewable and renewable resources. Well, we went over those in the vocabulary, so you might need to go back and look in the video. I went over those terms. What are renewable and non-renewable resources? Newton's laws of motion. Okay, so you do need to be familiar with these laws of motion, meaning object at rest. This should not say forces, it should say objects. I'm going to mark that out. Objects at rest stay at rest. And objects in motion stay in motion unless acted upon by an outside force. And believe it or not, I copied that definition out of the glossary, so there was a typo. So objects at rest stay at rest, objects in motion stay in motion unless acted upon by an outside force. So in other words, the reason cars will stop is because of brakes and the friction on the brakes, or if they run into something. So that's an example of Newton's first law of motion. Okay, Newton's second law of motion, force. The total force equals the mass of an object times its acceleration, so how quickly it's speeding up or slowing down. If we increase the mass of an object in order to keep it accelerating at the same speed, we must then increase the force at the same amount. So if we double the mass, then we must double the force in order to keep the acceleration the same. If we don't double the mass, then the force would be cut in half. I'm sorry, if we double the mass but don't change the force, then the acceleration would be cut in half. I'm sorry. Okay. And then for every force, there's an equal and opposite force. And we thought about the fact that when a rocket ship shoots up into space, there is the force of the engines and the explosions that are coming off of the engines going in the opposite direction. If you don't feel comfortable with those, you may want to go back and take a look at the activity that we reviewed, and there is a reading activity as well for Newton's laws of motion. Okay, plate tectonics and continental drift. So plate tectonics, I gave you a definition for plate tectonics. It is a theory about the movement of plates. What is it? And then how does it relate to continental drift? Well, continental drift, the concept of continental drift was actually around before the theory of plate tectonics. Continental drift said that the Earth was, all the continents were actually together as one called Pangea, one big continent called Pangea, and then over time those began to break apart and turned out to be where they are now. The question then is, how did they get there? That's plate tectonics. Plate tectonics explains the movement of those plates and how they move and have separated over time. So then Alfred Wegener really didn't study this, but later geologists studied what's the evidence for it. Well, one, the plates, remember, fit together sort of like a puzzle piece. And then also we studied the fact that there were fossils in South America that were exactly the same as fossils in Southern Africa, and that sort of was evidence to the fact that they probably were once together. Also, there were mountain ridges in North America that went through Europe. Again, evidence that at one point those plates were connected. Okay, you will have to have some answers with evidence and trade-offs. So remember, good evidence is data. They're observable things. They are not opinions. So it's not your opinion. It's some observable information that you have been able to get from a lab. Numbers, colors, amounts, all kinds of things, but not opinions. And then a trade-off is something that you give up for making a choice. So for instance, you want to buy a new iPad and you have $400, but you also want to buy a new video game console. Well, you can't do both. So you choose to buy the iPad. The trade-off, so the evidence is you think the iPad would help you more with school, there'd be more things to do, and maybe your mom and dad would like it, And the trade-off is you don't get to buy your video game console, but you do have the iPad. So good evidence and good trade-offs. Okay, Rat C, if by now you don't know what this is, I'm not sure what I can do to help you, but just remember all your long answer questions will have to be Rat Seed. And Rat C, again, R is restate the question, then you answer it. That's usually your first sentence. Then that T, and guys, the T is going to be really important in this ECA. It's 2, 2, 3. And if you possibly want to get a 4, you've got to have at least 3 pieces of evidence. 2 to 3 pieces of evidence, and then you must have a closing sentence. Okay? Rat C. Okay, you will have to read some tables. This is not the table that she'll be reading, but you will have to read some tables. And as you remember from looking at this table, the question might be, well, which are the properties that would be best at telling calcite apart from quartz? Well, would colorless, white, pink, red, green, blue, colorless, white, pink, purple, blue, yellow? Possibly if this one were green and this one were purple, you could see a difference, but they're probably not the best. Now, translucent and transparent, they're a little bit different, so possibly, but not that different. If they could be translucent or transparent, and actually I think we discovered too that those should be dull or shiny, but either way, they're not helpful. White and white, nope. Okay, here's a difference. On Mohs hardness scale, this is a hardness of 3. This is a hardness of 7. Okay, that's significantly different. So that's going to be good evidence to help us know if we do this hardness test. If it's a 3 or around a 3, it's calcite. If it's a 7 or around a 7, it's quartz. Same with reaction with acid. If it bubbles or fizzes, it's calcite. If there's no reaction, it's quartz. And then finally, light refraction, again, sometimes shows 2 images, always shows a single image. There's a difference. Those are good data. This, not so good. Okay. And then it says use both data tables to determine whether a mineral is calcite or quartz. Well, okay, so now we can look and we can say, and again, this should be dull or shiny, but we know that it's translucent. Okay, so that if we did it right, it's probably calcite. We know it's dull to glassy. That doesn't help us. The hardness is between 3 and 5.5. That's a good chance that it's calcite. And then finally, 2 images can be seen and small bubbles form. Okay, there you go. We've got calcite for sure. So our evidence would be, we'd restate the unknown mineral is calcite. I know this because when I tested its hardness, it was a 3 to 5.5. That's one piece of evidence. I also know because when we used the reaction with acid, there was bubbling and fizzing. And then third piece of evidence, it also, when we did light refraction, showed 2 images. Okay, so if you know these basic things, and again, to be able to give good evidence and trade-offs, and also understanding this new concept of why you chose your answer or why you didn't, then you are going to be really ready to go for this ECA if you can study the vocabulary that I did in the Prezi to begin with.